in early and staying late. Claude, sitting in the chair next to her, had taken a different approach, taking his superiors out to lunch and wooing them with his charm and wit. He wasn't handsome, his eyes bulged out slightly and his upper lip tended to sweat when he got excited, but he had broad shoulders and a thick head of hair, and most of the female librarians swooned when he paid them the slightest bit of attention. He'd shone his light on Sadie during the library's last Christmas party, kissing her in the back office area and making her feel breathless and beautiful. That time of year had always been a dismal one for Sadie. Christmas Eve was when her father had passed away, so even decades later, the sight of a pine tree aglow with a riot of primary colors induced in her an anxious melancholy. It also happened to be Christmas Eve when, sick with dread, she'd rifled through her now ex-husband's briefcase and found a bill for a credit card she'd never known about, filled with charges to the Washington Square Hotel and several Greenwich Village restaurants, all conveniently located near NYU, where Philip was a tenured math professor. Even though that was 6 years ago, the holidays still filled her with an ominous apprehension that the world might fall apart at any minute. So it was really no surprise that with Claude's unexpected kiss, even though his breath smelled like scotch, Sadie's Yuletide clouds of misery had gently evaporated. He'd been away for a week after that, during which time she'd let her imagination run wild, thinking of them together, wandering around the city, roaming from bookstore to bookstore. After he'd returned, they'd gone out to lunch together and sometimes dinner, where he held her a little too long when they said goodbye out on the street. At work, he'd made sweet overtures, like sharing a magazine article on the new Tennyson biography, or passing along the Times crossword once he'd finished with the paper. But then, one morning, she turned the corner near the administrative offices and spotted him deep in conversation with one of the young pages who worked in the stacks. The girl had thrown back her head and laughed, a high-pitched, ludicrous sound like she was being strangled with sleigh bells. And something in Sadie had shut down hard. The ups and downs of heartbreak were not for her, no way, not after what she'd already been through with Philip. That same day, deep in the stacks of the Berg collection, Sadie had come across an intriguing title she didn't remember seeing before, a first edition of Surviving Spinsterhood, The Joys of Living Alone, published in 1896 by Abigail Duckworth. She plucked the thin volume from the Berg's cage shelves and began reading, turning her back so any passing pages couldn't see what was in her hand. She'd flown through it, delighted at the timeless advice for successfully maintaining independence as a woman, chock full of pithy chapter headings like solitary refinement and pleasures of a single bed. For decades, women had lived happily, easily without a man. That was good enough for her. Claude had made overtures after that and been rebuffed at every turn. If he brought her the crossword, she'd say she already finished it. Articles, read them. These days, she and Claude had maintained a respectful, if chilly, distance, and whenever loneliness threatened, she'd pluck the book off the shelf and turn to a random page for a quick dose of witty inspiration. In Dr. Hooper's office, she smoothed down the voluminous skirt of her dress, hoping Dr. Hooper didn't find her outfit too frivolous for someone who'd just given a tour to trustees. That morning, she'd chosen a marigold-covered 50s shirt dress with thin orange stripes, admiring the way the full skirt fell away from her hips. It had been one of her most recent finds at the antique boutique thrift store downtown on Broadway. But today, under the harsh lights of the director's office, the yellow zinged brightly, perhaps too brightly. She'd gotten used to the various reactions to her daily ensembles, ranging from a surprised, "How lovely," to, "Well, that's an interesting outfit." Sure, her tastes were a far cry from the current craze for Doc Martens and oversized suits, but eventually they'd come back into style and she'd have the last laugh. In the meantime, she liked the idea of wearing a piece of history, whether it was a tailored 1930s suit, only slightly faded, or the 50s frock she wore today. Dr. Hooper consulted his notes. We've had to do some reshuffling. Marlene, as you know, unexpectedly extended her vacation. Permanently, it turns out. What? Sadie and Claude spoke at the same time. She reached out to me yesterday to let me know that she's taken the job of Chief of Collections at the Boston Library. Sadie sat back, stunned. That explained the unexpected goodbye hug that Marlene gave her the Friday before she left for vacation, as well as her extra detailed instructions for while she was gone. The decision to take the job in charge of all the collections at the third largest library in the country must have been very difficult. Yet it was a big step up, and Sadie just wished Marlene could have felt comfortable confiding in her. But that wouldn't have been professional, and Marlene was nothing but professional. She was poached? Asked Claude. Dr. Hooper harumphed. Yes, she gave her resignation yesterday and apologized for the short notice, but said that it couldn't be helped. She added that she was certain the two of you could take on the mantle. I hope she's right. This is terrible timing with the Berg collection exhibit to open in May. We're in a bind. If Marlene was no longer in charge, the logical next choice would be either Claude or Sadie. Sadie had been at the library longer, but Claude had more years in the Berg collection. It was a toss-up. What can we do to help? Dr. Hooper asked Claude. There's no time to look for an outside hire, so I've talked with the board of directors and we've decided that we'd like Sadie to take the helm, for now. The director wanted Sadie to become curator of the Berg collection, one of the most esteemed literary collections in America, right when they'd be mounting a major exhibition that would be written about in all the papers. I'm sorry, but why Sadie? Claude was not amused. I've been working closely with Marlene this past year, day after day. I know what she wants to include. Right, said Dr. Hooper. Luckily, we have the final list, so there are no decisions to be made there, as much as we appreciate all your hard work, of course. Sadie's been at the library longer, and we hope will bring her comprehensive knowledge to bear as we get the exhibit up and running. That means long hours, lots of research and writing, but we believe you both will rise to the occasion. Of course, Sadie tried to contain her joy. What she really wanted to do was leap to her feet and jump up and down the way her 6-year-old niece, Valentina, did when she won at Connect 4, but that wouldn't do at all. I'll get right on it. Thank you. I want to be clear, this is on a trial basis. I'll make another more permanent decision after the exhibit is up and running. He shifted to address Claude. Claude, I can't tell you how much we appreciate all of the hard work you've done and will continue to do. What an opportunity. The job went way beyond her current role as chronicler of old books and literary paraphernalia. As the face of the exhibit, she'd be able to share with the world her love of these historical objects and the emotions they represented to her. She might even get offered the job for good as the permanent curator of the Berg. For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Hooper went through the list of exhibit items one by one in alphabetical order, asking for a progress report. All went smoothly until he reached the L's. I noticed that the Laura Lyons walking stick is on the list of exhibit items, he said. In the past 5 years, there'd been a reawakening in interest around Laura Lyons as her essays were re-examined by feminist scholars and cited for their forward thinking. The few details of the writer's reclusive life were being mined for clues, which made the walking stick a perfect choice. But Sadie stiffened as Dr. Hooper continued. Since she lived here at one point in her life, I want one of you to go through the library's archives, see if you can find anything about her that we've missed. I'd like to include more than the walking stick, an essay, some original piece of her work, a letter, something that would attract a lot of attention. I'll do that, offered Claude. No, I'll do it. Sadie didn't care that she was being rude. I studied her work in college and so have a working background that will be useful. Of course, all her private letters and manuscripts were destroyed right after her death, so I'd be surprised if we found anything of interest. In any event, let me know what you discover. She avoided meeting Dr. Hooper's eyes as she assured him that she would. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much, Fiona. That was great. And I love that passage because it has so much in it. It has so much about Sadie. It has some about her choices in attire, which are suitable for someone who's interested in history as she is. And she's got the vintage wear and the sort of the chaste almost affair with Claude, who's kind of, you know, I don't like Claude right away anyway, but I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it's great character. And then and wonderful detail of the joys of spinsterhood, which, you know, it's not a book you'd see today, I don't think, in today's world of authorship. But at any rate, for those of you who signed on who were here last week, we know that I had the great good fortune to be talking to Amy Popel, who was an actor first, and then after a lot of different course of events, became a writer. And here we have Fiona Davis, who was also an actor and then became a journalist, which is another subject near and dear to my heart, of course. And I want to start with some biographical stuff for you, Fiona, which is when you were going to school or whatever, and you started out as an actor. First of all, why did you choose acting, and how did you prepare for that? And then how long did you do that before you started to get to the J School, which we'll get to next? But talk about the acting career a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So after college, I came to New York and got into an acting school here and just thought, oh yeah, sure, I guess I'll do that. There really wasn't a whole lot of direction, to be honest. And I worked for about 10 years doing Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theater. I'm 5'10", so if there was a production of Three Tall Women, I was probably in it. And it was fantastic. I also worked in a theater company that a group of my friends put together. And we did all kinds of shows, from Beckett to Shakespeare. One of our plays went from off-Broadway to Broadway and was nominated for a Tony Award, which was really incredible. We lost to Liam Neeson doing Anna Christie, so, but you know, we'll let that fly. And it was amazing because, you know, we did everything. We hung the lights, we sold the tickets, we swept the stage, and those are my friends still today. So it was an incredible decade. But as I started getting a little older, I noticed that my friends who were women, who were kind of the ingenue type, were having a harder time getting work. And then my friends who were men were aging into these marvelous character roles. And I just thought, well, that's not fair. And so I thought, well, what else would I want to do? And I thought journalism sounded interesting, and applied to Columbia Journalism School and got in, and suddenly was off on another direction. And I'm so glad I did. The program there was fantastic. And I really learned how to read and write and how to think and how to go out and interview people. And all those skills helped me as a historical fiction writer, no question.
Okay, so that sounds perfect, but it's not easy to get into Columbia J School. That's not a simple matter. So from you as an accomplished actor and theater,
I think I was just something different, and sometimes that works in your favor. You know, I certainly had no background as a journalist and really had no idea what I was talking about. But they through Newsweek and Time magazines for the entire year, and just each, you know, day go and get through another 10 and try to memorize what happened in the year 1999.
well, I think it's marvelous that you got there, and you must have had some interest in research, as you did the research for the test and to get in, the application and so forth. So, and that was that part of the thing? Because as an actress, I mean, when I was working at the newspaper, a lot of young reporters wanted to go to J School. And I would talk to them about, will you learn more by J School, going to J School, or will you learn more by staying on the job and working as a working reporter and so forth? But I noticed that a lot of people that went to J School all went into broadcast because they thought of print as a dying medium, and let's do the broadcast thing. And so it would be a natural segue for an actress to do the broadcast thing, you would think.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
about the writing. The writing was more important to you.
Oh yeah, and you know, I immediately, actually, you know what I got caught up in there when I was there was something called new media, which was online writing, which was, you know, considered just wild. It was new. And now, of course, it's just digital media. But so it was all about, you know, how do you design a website? All these things that now it's just such a different world in 20 years. But what was fun in terms of researching the book is my character, Laura, goes to Columbia Journalism School in 1913. And she's met with all kinds of sexism. Back then, only 15% of the class was women. It was pretty amazing that it was co-ed. And it had just opened a year before my character starts up there. And there was a wonderful book published about the history of the J School that listed all these things of just how tough it was for a woman, that the men got assigned to go and cover murders or politics, and the women had to go down to the tenements and, you know, interview crying orphans. And
And they'd be lucky to do that, because
yeah,
you like go to a sewing circle and tell us about the sewing circle, you know.
exactly. So it was fun to weave that into the book. But I have to say that the journalism school made great strides. You know, back then that was the way the world was. And these days, the Columbia Journalism School is 75% women. So things have changed.
And generally better writers anyway. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but and a horrible generalization, but it's the case. But when you were at J School, is that where you really got your teeth sinking into doing research, historical research, that deep research that you're doing? Because you've obviously done a lot for this book, and I'm sure for the other ones as well.
Yeah, you know, I think it made me unafraid to go out and interview people and ask questions. You know, a lot of writers just do their research on the internet. And for me, I like to go out and talk to architectural historians or get into a building and interview residents, people who've lived there in the past. And to me, that's where all the gold is, you know, and just knowing how to do a deep dive on a subject. Like for the New York Public Library, as I started researching it, because I wasn't sure if it would be a good location or not, I learned online in the New York Times archives, there was an article from the 1940s about the superintendent who was retiring from his position, and that he'd lived in the library for 30 years in this 7-room apartment that was built deep inside it for the super and his family. And he lived there with his wife and his 3 kids. His daughter was born in the library. The kids used to play baseball in the reading room using books as bases until they got caught. It was just the most wonderful article. And once I read that, I thought, well, now I've got my setting. This will work. And I created a fictional family that lives in the library and gets kind of drawn into a series of book thefts and a terrible tragedy.
So when you came out from J School, you were an editor first before you were actually a writer. So that's kind of reverse order, isn't it? So how did that come about?
You know, I worked as an editor for a technical theater magazine, and it was very small. It was a tiny staff, so it's not like, you know, there were maybe 3 of us. But that was a lot of fun, and it really got me into, you know, how it works in the world and what's it like to work on a magazine. And I really enjoyed it. And then I went off and did a lot of health and fitness writing and freelanced. If you needed a 900-word article on heartburn, I was your girl. And that was interesting also. And then later, after about 15 years, I had this idea for an article I wanted to write about the Barbizon Hotel for Women, because I learned that, you know, when it was built, there were these about a dozen of the old-time residents still living there, and that they were moved into rent-controlled apartments on the 4th floor when it went condo. And I just thought that, you know how when you're a journalist, you hear a story idea and you're like, ooh, that's a good one. And I knew that was because it would show how the city and the building had changed over time and how it hadn't. But the women of the Barbizon are very private. And at that point, they were not willing to talk to me, although later they did. But I couldn't shake it. And I just thought, well, this is such a fun idea. And I want to read a book about this. There's nothing out there. So maybe I'll try and write it. If I'd had any idea how hard it is to write a book, I would have never attempted. But it was just sort of, you know, ignorance is bliss, and let's see where this goes.
Well, it's magnificent. And I see that, you know, looking at the other books, I see that you've got this idea of, let's pick a spot, let's pick an iconic architectural or space, a residential space or some kind of space, and let's create characters for it. But and you did, and I love the overlap between you and your characters. I think in the Dollhouse, you have a reporter in the modern age who's looking into the mystery that happened before. I don't know about the other books, but we certainly have a reporter in Laura Lyons. And when she goes to J School, she enjoys copy editing. So that's something she likes to do. So I'm thinking, okay, well, Fiona probably likes to copy edit. So, and she was an editor. So we have these things together. So okay, so that explains the Dollhouse and the Barbizon Hotel. And so from there, you said, well, I've done this now. I didn't know how hard it was going to be, but now I do know. But maybe I could do it with some other building. So what did you go from that to the masterpiece?
No, the next one was the address, which
Oh,
takes
the
place
address.
in the Dakota.
Right, the
Yeah.
Dakota. So how did you choose the Dakota? Talk about that.
You know, it chose me. I was walking by it one day and it was just gleaming in the sun and it was like it had turned gold and I just thought, oh, that's a great building. It's beautiful. It's calling out to me. I will answer. But I didn't know anyone who lived there and I wasn't sure if I could do it because I didn't know if I could get in. Um, so a good friend of mine who's a real estate broker mentioned that Lauren Bacall's apartment was on the market for $23 million. Let's go see it. So I threw a scarf around my neck and we showed up and I got this amazing tour of Lauren Bacall's apartment. And I just studied everything thinking this is the only time I'll ever get in. And I was just trying to memorize every detail, the fireplace mantle, the molding. And then later I was able to get to know a current resident and he gave me a full tour from the basement up to this, the top floor where the maids used to live. And that was so helpful because I really have to get inside in order to get a sense of it. Like the Dakota is interesting because it looks so grand on the outside, but once you get inside, the hallways are really narrow and it's very dark. And so there's this really eerie sense of compression as you're walking around that is a little unexpected. And so it was fun to be able to bring that out in the book.
Well, I think it's wonderful because you pick these buildings that have a lot of mythology around them. And then made them real with the characters. And now talk about the fact that you're adding mystery to all these because you're working in a broader context of historical fiction, but within that context, you're almost a genre mystery writer at this point. So how did that work out? And, well, before we even get to that part, so by the time you came to the Dakota and you answered the call, you know you're going to do a book. This wasn't for an article. You said, okay, I can do a book about this place. So, but you had a mystery in the Dollhouse. So you say, I'm going to have a mystery in the Dakota too? I mean, explain that a little bit about your mystery writing aspect.
I just love a page turner. I love a book that has a major plot twist or two and a real aha moment at the end where everything comes together and it's completely surprising, yet also feels inevitable. And again, so those are the books I like to read. So when I was growing up, all the Nancy Drew, Agatha Christie, I thought was brilliant, and so for me, it just felt natural to have a book, have a mystery, because that's what I like to read. And now, of course, I'm working in 2 timelines in each book, which means that it's really hard to draw out a mystery without giving up too much in one timeline or dropping a red herring in the wrong place in the other. And I joke around that every so often as I'm trying to braid these 2 timelines together, my head is just, going nuts and I have to go and drink a lot of wine and that usually helps. But it's a challenge. I think because my dad's an engineer, I love the idea of trying to get these stories to merge and make them flow so that in the end, you feel really satisfied. And it's to me it's part of the fun, but also part of the absolute pain.
Well, I'm sure of that, and I'm glad that wine helps because it doesn't always help everybody. Sometimes it does the opposite, but that's a good thing. But yeah, I think you do, at least in the book that so much of that I've read, is they are woven together really beautifully. And one of the tricks for making it a page turner, of course, is because you're working the 2 timelines. And you tease out a little bit of the mystery in the older timeline. And as we're just getting to the point of, oh, wait a minute, wait, and then we go to the new timeline. And then there's a sort of a secondary mystery because we're having, and so these things start coming together and you have a relationship between the 2. And in The Lions of Fifth Avenue, you have Pearl, who is introduced as a tiny baby or a small toddler, I guess. And then we have her as the grandmother of Sadie. So, and that brings the past back to the present thing. So I don't know if you have that in the other books too. I mean, I think in the description of it, I think some of that happens, but that's a feat of engineering. But more to the point that I want to get to is, and this connects to theater as well, is when you're an actor, you have to research your character. You have to know who your character is. And you're also looking in the period. What's the period of the piece? When was it written? What's it written for? What's the sensibility of those people? So that when we hear Laura Lyons, when we get Laura Lyons' point of view, This isn't, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, this is the character that's introduced in the beginning in 1913, 1914, I guess.
Mhm.
And she's married to the superintendent of the library, and her sensibility is it feels spot on to the time. And so, but that's what an actor would do. An actor would say, okay, this character makes decisions, makes choices based on who they are and what their context is. So was that helpful to you to go from the world of theater and researching period piece and period character? What's the backstory for these characters and creating
Yeah.
the characters?
Oh yeah, definitely. It definitely helps to just be able to inhabit another character, get into their mind, and place them in a room and see how they would react to it, because you're trying to get right in there. And again, for me, it's looking at the surprises. So Laura Lyons is in the 1910s, and she's a wife and a mother, and she really wants something more out of life, and she's surrounded by all this knowledge in the library, but feels really stifled. And so for that, I did a lot of research into what was it like to be a woman in the 1910s. And at the time, there was something called the New Woman, and it was women who were trying to change the world, and in surprising ways. So they'd meet down in Greenwich Village at a club and really discuss huge issues of the day, like women's rights, the right to vote, birth control, even free love. And so all these things that we kind of associate with the 60s or 70s were widely discussed and debated in the 1910s. And that's what I love in terms of writing historical characters, is teasing out the things that are resonant today, that might surprise us, that happened then. And that helps to get into a character and figure out who she is and what she wants. And that just slowly unfolds over the course of writing the book.
Yeah, because you have Sadie who speaks about her divorce in very modern terms, and in terms that would befuddle Laura Lyons in terms of approaching her husband to see if she can get the $85. By the way, those of you who haven't read the book, surprising thing for those of us that know journalism and journalism school or college education or postgraduate education, $85 a term when they first started the Columbia School of Journalism. It's an amazing thing. But when she goes to ask permission, he can't give her his permission because he's a novelist, and which is okay for a man, but I mean, a woman being a reporter and of course spending that much money is kind of crazy. But I think that in the I think it's Chelsea Girls, maybe is that the shortest time frame you have from the 1940s to the 1960s?
Yeah.
Because the other ones seem to be a little farther apart. Can you talk about how far you set these apart and why?
Yeah, so the Chelsea Girls is a little different because that takes place in 1950s New York City, the Broadway scene during the McCarthy era. And it's a little different, where it's two different women's perspectives going back and forth in the same time period. And then it jumps to the late 60s. And that's the one that's set at the Chelsea Hotel, which is just a marvelous location to write about because it's full of ghosts and really quirky characters. And so that one's a little different from the others. But with this book, I knew I wanted the 1910s because I liked the fact that the journalism school was open then. And then 1993 I chose because I wanted to, there's a book theft in the book. And I wanted to base it on one that happened at Columbia University's Butler Library in 1994, where a thief stole $1.8 million of rare books and manuscripts over the period of 3 months. And no one could figure out how he was getting in and out. And so I started researching that. And so it needed to be set in the 90s just because of the technology going on then. And that was really interesting because I was able to interview a librarian who was there at Butler Library during that time and ask her what it was like. And she talked about how the staff started turning on each other as no one could figure out where these valuable works were going. And they eventually did catch the thief, and she went before the judge and asked for a harsher sentence. And she explained that, these books aren't just X worth pages worth X, but a piece of Western history and culture. And that libraries have been safeguarding them and keeping them safe, these artifacts of the past, that their value changes over time, like something that wasn't really valuable 100 years ago, like women's diaries or records of slave transactions, today are very valuable because our way of thinking has evolved. And she explained this all to the judge, and he was so moved that he granted a harsher sentence. And that really changed things going forward in terms of a thief getting a harsher sentence if something's stolen from a museum or a library. And I was just so inspired by her story as kind of a literary hero in her own right that I wanted to see if I could create that in this story here.
That's incredible. That kind of that research and bringing that to light in a different way. And it is so important to think about the value of things changing and so forth, which is why the libraries, the ancient libraries in Syria being destroyed is just makes you weep to think about, the nature of Western civilization and the way we think about things is all comes from that. And to have those things lost forever is just unspeakable. But you have in the political venue of McCarthyism, back to Chelsea Girls. So you use that abbreviated time frame to really zero in on that one thing, and that seems pretty journalistic. So I'm not sure where the mystery is in that part, but I'd love to know it. But going back to Agatha Christie for a second, by choosing these venues, these spaces in which the public library is not a great place to necessarily to live in, because a lot of people don't know that, but there is the idea of the culture of the people that work there. And Christie's idea was, Miss Marple's idea was, you can learn everything you need to know from a small village. And I think that you've taken these places like the Dakota or the Grand Central or whatever, and you unearth certain things about it, but then you create these characters that inform you about the mystery. You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of brilliant. I wanted to ask you something else. Yes, this is a personal thing. You're way too young to know about it, but would you ever be interested? And then you've done Grand Central, so it's kind of, you probably wouldn't want to go there, but I would love to have somebody write something about Penn Station, because I think that's one of the great tragedies of New York history. A grand building that I and maybe some of the people that are on had the great joy of using it for a little bit. And then I was in a play reading at Guildhall that somewhere wrote about the construction of it and then the destruction of it over time, how it got built and so forth. And what a great, great building that is. I mean, you think about Grand Central, Penn Station, if you've seen any of the images of it, it's magnificent. So and you're not going to write Penn Station for me, I know that, but what do you think for your next venue?
I'm working on it now. There's always a long lag time between when you turn in the book to when it gets published. So the book Lions just came out this week. But I'm looking into the Frick collection, which is just a wonderful, oh good, I see people nodding and clapping, that's always nice. It's less known than some of my other ones, but the Frick is just this marvelous building that was the home of Henry Clay Frick and his family. He died in 1919, and after his wife died, it was turned over and became a museum, and it's just a gem of a building. And I love the fact that it was a residence and then later a museum. So I'm kind of toying with that and playing around with it.
That sounds great. I look forward to seeing that. I want to read all the other books too, because now that it's like you have to read all the Christie novels, you have to read all of the Fiona Davis novels.
I like that. All right.
And learn about these spaces, incredible spaces. So here's a little question that I don't know if you get a lot, but I just wonder about it. How do you name your characters? How do you decide on the names of your characters? How does that come to you?
What I normally do is I do a Google search for the year of their birth. So if they were, say, Laura's in her 20s in 1913, so I look at, in your 1880s, what was the popular name of that year of her birth? And you get so many great ones, and ones that you don't expect, Winnie or Bertha, and so I'm always on the lookout for interesting names that feel real to the period. But that's what I tend to do. And then I just have to make sure they all begin with a different letter so people don't get confused. That's a key writer's trick right there.
And you also have a lovely sort of a naming story about Pearl, which was great, I thought. I don't know if any other characters ever get that good of a naming story, but that one was beautiful.
Yeah.
So now you've gone from acting to journalism school to working in journalism to writing these historical novels. And are you going to stay with this now, or you've got other things on your mind?
Oh, sure. You know, I'm so happy. And this book was just picked for Good Morning America's book club pick this week. So it was just this incredible surge of attention and information. It's just been the most amazing week. So no, I'm not going anywhere. And, you know, for me, what I like is the fact that I really, you know, did something different before I started writing, which I think gave me a story to tell. You know, I tell writers, don't worry if you're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. It's never too late. I was an actress in my 20s and then was a journalist 30s, 40s, and I didn't publish my first book until I was 49. And so, you know, there's plenty of time. And I think it's so important to have something you're passionate about, and that takes living life.
Oh, it's beautiful. I'm loving this book, and I can't wait to read the other ones. And I don't know if we have if Jenny has any questions that she'd like to throw out to the audience. I think so. So Jenny will read you some questions, and I may or may not have to jump back in and say something because I can't help myself. But
Absolutely. And you have to read Chelsea Girls because it's all theater. It's right up your alley.
I gotta look at that. I want to see it. And the Chelsea Hotel. I mean, all these places. There's such. As I said, there's so much mythology about them. They have so much character to them. So putting the characters in there and then adding the mystery onto it. I mean, who could ask for anything more?
There we go.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for talking to me. And I may be talking to you some more as we get these questions coming in. But
Great.
Jenny.
Yes, Fiona, we've got a number of questions for you. Anissa, I hope I'm pronouncing your first name right. Anissa asks, who was the hardest character to write and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say Sadie was probably the toughest, and she's the one I read in the beginning, and she's the curator at the Bird Collection in the 1990s section because she's a quirky duck. She's a little prickly, and so I wanted to make sure I got her tone right without making her unlikable. You know, I wanted her to feel like she has a heart, and so that was an interesting balance to make. I tend in my early drafts to make people kind of unlikable, and then I have to pull back and, you know, make them sweet.
Neat. All right. Susan asks, did the volume from Virginia Woolf's diaries really go missing, or was that fiction? Was it difficult to mix fictional stories and people with historic events, places, and people?
That is such a good question. And okay, so Virginia Woolf's diaries, which were written in ink on stationer's notebooks, are all at the Bird Collection. They only recently acquired them. They also have her walking stick that she left beside the side of the river before she killed herself. They've got all these interesting artifacts. And so no, her notebooks have never gone stolen. And Laura Lyons is definitely an homage to Virginia Woolf in terms of what she does and ends up doing. But no, so, and it was tricky because I wanted to have real books go missing and rare books go missing as part of the book theft that really links the two time periods. And some of the books had gone missing, but most of them I had the thief steal them. And then I try to explain very carefully in the author's note at the end what's real and what's not so that people understand.
Great, thank you. Margaret is pointing out that there's a Pittsburgh connection with the Frick, and she's wondering if you're going to be venturing outside of New York City for the book on the Frick.
In a normal time, I would definitely, because that's the house where they really established themselves. They really came to New York very late. They only built the Frick in, I think, 1914, and Mr. Frick only lived there for 5 years. So that is a huge part of their story, and I would love to go. I've been kind of stalking it online, so hopefully I'll be able to get there because I think that would be great.
Nice, good. Here is a question from Margaret. She asked, where do you write? And before the quarantine, did you write in a library?
Oh yeah, that's such a good question. The library, the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue, has a room called the Allen Room that's for authors with book contracts. And so I applied and I got a desk in there. And what that means is you can ask books and they send them right to your bookshelf. So I had books on typhoid or the construction of the library rating just right there for me when I went into work. And that was wonderful. And the librarians as well were really, really helpful. There was there is one point where in an early draft of the book, and this is laughing because she's heard this before, in an early draft of the book, there was a dead body. And I reached out to a librarian at the New York Public Library, and I said, look, if you had to hide a dead body in the library, where would you put it? And she wrote back immediately with the location, in the basement near the carpenter's room, you know, and I said, that is so great. She said she'd never gotten that question before. And we joke around that we're both probably under surveillance at this point. But that's the beauty of a librarian. You know, she did not skip a beat, just figured it out and got me the answer. So I was very lucky in that way. Typically I work in my office. I'm in the city right now, and this is where I would work. There's a view of the Hudson River kind of that way if I turn my head, and that's always nice to see water. But then during quarantine, I have a house, a farmhouse just north of the city. So I've been spending a lot of time up there and working at my dining room table and just spreading out. So it's been a mix.
Nice, good. This is also from Margaret. She wants to know if, she says that you've been an actress, a journalist, an editor, and an author. Any chance that the study of architecture is in your future?
No, I will leave that up to the experts. I'm so lucky in that I have a couple architectural historians who I reach out to whenever I'm working on a book, and they just have a photographic memory of the history of New York City. And that is really helpful to be able to tap their brains and try and figure out how to make a book out of a building, which is kind of a crazy thing to do. So yeah, I just love doing it. I think architecture, that would require a whole other, I guess I should get another degree in my 50s, right? Why not?
Lifelong learning. You're not going to get an argument from a librarian. So
there we go.
I've got one more question for you. This is from Ellen, and she is asking if you could talk about the street children in the 1910s.
Yeah, so my character Laura meets someone who's based on an actual doctor named S. Josephine Baker. And this is when Laura's sent down to the tenements to do, you know, find orphan children. And she does, and she meets this doctor who is advising a mother and giving her advice on how to take care of her kids. And this includes, don't give them beer. Because back then it was a very different time, and you know, people raised their children. There was no education as to health and children. And this woman who I based a character on in the book went on to save hundreds of lives. Within like 3 years, she instituted a program where it was almost like a visiting nurse program. And before then, it was all men in charge and no one actually visited the families. But she instituted this incredible program that saved thousands of babies' lives and made a real difference. And I just wanted to make sure that someone like that kind of got credit, because I think a lot of people don't know of her. And so that's where in the book, there's a whole thing of going down to the Lower East Side and meeting a family that is terribly poor and trying to do their best.
Nice. So interesting. So many interesting threads that are coming together, and I'm enjoying hearing you talk about this book. And it's really, like Andrew said, it's really making me curious to read all the others. I feel like my love for New York is going to just find the perfect connection with all of these abilities to sort of focus them towards a place and a building. And so thank you.
Yeah.
I would just say, if anyone else has a question, now would be the time to send it over in the chat for me.
I have a question for Fiona too. Well, it's not so much a question as the fact of you're being able to, you humanize these buildings. You give these buildings a life of their own because of the characters that inhabit them. And that's a way, it's a theater trick too, to take your setting and have your setting and sort of sets up who the people are. But who the people are changes the setting, you know what I mean? So there's that back and forth, that give and take between the two. And I think that's, at least in this book, it's a really marvelous feature of the writing, which is not only blending the two time frames together and giving us a picture of what that older time period is like, and then sort of seen through a modern sensibility, as you say, just books, rare books, but it's also buildings, people, culture. But all that's the nature of good historical fiction, I think, brings us to back to the past and into the present, see how it shaped us, who we are now. But the buildings themselves become such human characters. They get so much context and depth from it. So I think that's brilliant, and really appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, thank you. You know, what was really fun in this book was to really dive into the Bird collection, which is this like a library within a library of rare books and manuscripts. And they also have things like Jack Kerouac's boots and a lock of Walt Whitman's hair. And what these items inside really show the thought processes of these writers. So something like Virginia Woolf's notebooks, or a scrap of a draft of a Walt Whitman poem, you really get a sense that these authors who we revere are human, right? And you can see the words that are scratched out as they discarded, an idea, or rips where maybe they were frustrated, or a coffee stain where they didn't realize this one piece of paper would be worth tens of thousands of dollars one day. And so to me, that's the beauty of books and the Bird collection and what I was trying to capture. Because I think in these days with computers, you don't see the drafts, they're not saved for posterity. In my case, that's a really good thing. But it's just wonderful that something like the Bird collection exists and is keeping these works safe through history.
Well, the human touch is to be revered even more in the digital age. The printed page and the draft, as you say, and to think that I saw a first folio of Shakespeare in Oxford, and I broke down weeping. I just couldn't even believe it. And that idea, as you say, that it puts a human hand, and the human hand, we don't want that to disappear. No matter how smart we get with our AI and our virtual and everything else, we have to have the human hand. And I think you've done that with the history, by creating these characters and giving them life and giving us their lives, as well as a mystery, which is just a bonus as far as.
And it really is just a love letter to librarians. So thank you, Jenny.
Thank you. If you don't mind, we've got a couple other questions that have come in.
Sure.
Susan is curious about how you feel about Susan Orlean's library book.
Oh yeah, that was wonderful. And what a great cover. I don't know if anyone's seen the paperback, but it's just remarkable. Yeah, and that's where she's really talking about how important libraries are for the community. And yeah, I thought that was a beautiful book, and she writes so well.
And if you have a chance to listen to it on audiobook, she reads it, and it's fantastic. Okay. Barbara wants to know if you have a favorite character, and it can be from any of your books, but who would that be and why?
All right, I would have to say my first book, The Barbizon, called The Dollhouse at the Barbizon Hotel for Women. There's a character in it called Darby, who's a real fish out of water. It's the 1950s. She's come to New York to go to secretarial school, and she's put in the Barbizon Hotel for Women on the floor with the Ford models. And I just love the way she overcomes. I love characters with a kind of a strong character arc where they go from one thing into another and really change over the course of the book. And Darby does that. She really comes into her own in a lovely way. So I'd say Darby.
Nice.
And Eileen Ford lived in Quogue for many years.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Just tie that together for you.
It all connects.
All right. The comment that I just want to share is from Elizabeth, who said that all of your books are marvelous. So I want to say that speaking with you and getting to hear from you and your process and your interests that's been marvelous. So thank you so much for being so generous with your time. It's really fun, and being so generous with your writing. I cannot wait to read all of it and to definitely read through all of your work. So thank you so much, Fiona. Andrew, thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. It's been so great to see all your faces. It's made my Sunday, and I really appreciate it and hope that we'll see all of you next week. And Fiona, I hope we'll be able to have you back at the library when we open our beautiful new doors. And thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your Sunday, everybody.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you, Andrew.
Good night.